Guys, welcome. Steve back, and we're going to go over a very fun way to procedurally make a landscape that is a displacement, and then we'll tie it in with some proximity nodes, and then we can tie it all into one really nice node. So where we have the proximity literally reacting with the instances and everything else that is inside of the scene. And so, as always, let's have fun doing it and try to break Blender while we do it. Let's get started. All right, guys, so let's get into it. You can create your screen any way you want. I'm actually going to right-click here and click not join areas. How about I do a vertical split? I'm going to bring this over here so that way I can see my 3D viewport on one side, and then I have a nice large area in the middle for my geometry nodes. And I can switch that workspace right here to geometry nodes and hit N to get rid of that. Now, if you have any trouble following along, I'll have this blend file on my Patreon, so you can come over there and grab that if you like. I've got some free add-ons over there as well if you become a Patreon. And otherwise, let's have some fun and get started. So the base mesh, whatever you choose, is what you're going to end up with at the end for those points inside of that grid, the cubes that were in like the fishing net. Okay, so and you can of course change what that object is. It has no bearing on what you start off with, but if you use that base geometry, that's what it's going to be, and it's no big deal. I'm going to go ahead and use that. If you're not using inside of edit add-on preferences area, if you're not using the node wrangler range setup, go ahead and check all those on. It's going to be easier. Control right slash will get rid of that, and we can save that because we're going to actually use it. So Shift A and S. This is how you're going to get into your search menu pretty much every single time. You can come up here to add and do a search. I am using version 3.6 beta, and anything I believe over 3.5.1 is going to have this new kind of enum setup with the itemized cleanup. So it's really nice. But Shift A S, okay, then you could just start typing what you want. It's more intuitive this way. So the grid is what we're going to work with, and we can just go ahead and plug in the grid. Okay, now from here, let's go ahead and make a little bit of room. Put this over there somewhere, it's fine. Now we're going to want is a set position node, so Shift A S, and you could type in set POS and it'll come up, set position, and you can go ahead and drop that in. Now we want to hit Shift A S, and we're going to drop in a noise texture. Okay, and we're going to stack these kind of like code from like left to right, top to bottom, and Shift A S MUSG, Musgrave texture. These two are going to be our way to create a displacement on here, and we're also going to switch between those and then lock that in over here so that we have something to control. Now, before we get too far along, you're going to want to be able to control these outside. So the grid size is going to be very important, and it'll be procedural. You'll see how this will work. And then the vertice count is going to be pretty important too. Now, we could simply leave the vertice count low and put in Shift A S a subdivide. And I prefer the Subdivide Mesh because I can now output this value to the group input, and I can input that here. So now I'll be able to change those levels outside of the node, and we can also grab these for the grid, and then we can hit N. And we're just going to do this as we go, so it's not like a big task by the time we get to the end of it. And we bring the grid up a couple times, brings size Y up a couple times, double left click here, and what you could do is you could just type in grid so you know what you've got. Always name things in Blender, put a little space, do something, denote it. You will regret it dearly later if you don't. And this is organizing as you go instead of just trying to set everything up. It will keep a nice clean setup. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift A S, type in FRA for frame. Let's drop this here. Now all you have to do is left click, drag, and select these nodes. They'll go together, and then bring the corner where the mouse is, and then you can grab that. And now from here, you can go up to node, check on color, and you could change this to something that you want. I'm going to put it kind of similar to the color of the actual node itself, just to kind of keep things standard. And then if I wanted to, I could put a frame in up here as well and kind of start something out with my grid and my set position. And then I could change this node, maybe make it green because that is my original position for the geometry. Now, Control S, you want to go ahead and save this somewhere. That way you don't have a crash, and you can hit N to get rid of that. Now, just so you understand what's going on, the noise texture, this is a field's output, and this is a float value. This is just like this value right here. It has absolutely nothing to do with a vector. 3 points in space, that to be a vector. Okay, the RGB output color, that's a vector. And you can conceptually plug the color directly into the offset. And then if you come over here to the levels, which I put to 0, I'll kind of zoom in, get rid of, actually you can press T in this 3D viewport, and T will get rid of that panel. That's called the T panel. Now I can bring up my levels, and you can kind of see what this subdivide is going to do. And then if I want to bring up the vertice count, I can do that as well, but it's going to get convoluted kind of quick, and you're going to add tons and tons of geo. I think you're pretty safe to just leave that at 5 and then bring these levels up, which is now the actual set position is being controlled by this noise texture. And so as I kind of bring this noise in and out, you can see how that's going to actually affect everything. And I can also work with the distortion levels, try to keep that like 0.1. I could bring up the detail if I wish. This can actually be controlled by another, like any type of texture you want. So I could go to the scale and now control that with a Musgrave and kind of get some different results, whatever you think you might want to do. I'm going to press Control X, which deletes that and then keeps everything good. And I'll go ahead and save. Now this can actually be switched. Okay, so we're actually going to switch these. So Shift A S, type in switch, and we'll just build this as we go. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to plug this in, and we're going to use a vector for this. All right, so we get those RGB values, and I go ahead and plug this in right here, and then output this back to the offset. And then I could start dragging this and getting wires everywhere. But if you want to keep this really nice and clean, you can just Shift D the output and bring that somewhere maybe under the node, and then output your Boolean switch. And now you've got a switch between the two different types. And it's not all operating the way we want just yet. I'm going to fix that in just a minute, so no worries. And so now you've got an output for that. And also, if you wanted, you could drag out the scale here, and you could drag out, and be careful, this switch for the fields is connected. Don't try to reconnect it because it's just down here on another group input. So you will see some gaps, and I've already got a little bit of an error right here. This is going to produce an error. So the geometry needs to be first. I didn't see that, so I'm going to go back to group, grab geometry. Don't hit the plus or minus. Just go ahead and hit the up arrow until the geometry is at the top. And if you had a nice little error like I did, then it will go away. And once again, just save. A couple of math nodes in between here, and I'm going to give us a little bit more control. So let's go ahead and drop this in. And then I'm going to Shift D, drop in another one. I can move this one to subtract, and what's going to happen is it's going to kind of move around like crazy. We don't want that. It's okay. I'll switch this one to multiply, and you see we're still kind of getting that craziness. What we want to do is control how this works, and we want to just have this on the Z axis going straight up and down. So from here we can just go ahead and Shift A S. Let's drop in a normal node, and we can plug this in here, and this shifts everything up. So Shift A S, we could put in a transform geo and drop that in and bring this down by like -1 and just kind of test out where you're at. So -0.5 should put me back in the grid. Don't really want to be in the grid, so I'm going to kind of bring that up just a touch anyways. I can go ahead and minimize that transform and go ahead and create a save point. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and I can make another grid. I can just Shift D that, drop that in. This will be for my math, so make it a mathy type color. If there is such a thing, we'll just go with blue. Looks good. All right, so the next step, and you can, of course, adjust this however you want, so you can get a ton of different results. The next step would be to add some more to this. Now, I'm going to isolate a bunch of different areas here, but Shift A S, type in shade, and set shade smooth, and you can drop that in. And now you'll be able to turn shade smooth on and off, and you'll have a Boolean check for that down here. Shade smooth kind of makes sense to have that locked in as well. And we can move our booleans together for now. Probably just regroup everything a little bit later, but just bringing the booleans up for the moment. All right, so the next thing we can do is let's go ahead and build on our set position. And I'll do is I'll put another set position. And we can build out our proximity node from here. So Shift A S, type in PROX for geometry proximity. Go ahead and drop in Shift A S. Let's get a couple of math nodes in here. Drop in 2. We'll put 1 to subtract and 1 to multiply. Connect those. And to make this a bit more of an intuitive function, and something we can export to the node, we'll go ahead and throw a map range in. Shift A S, type in map, and get a map range node. Now what we're going to be using is going to be the distance value, and then we can plug that in to our set position. We will be using the results here from the distance to the value, and then we can just start plugging these in to the top values is fine. And for here, what we can do is we can go ahead and put in a combine. Shift A S, combine XYZ, because what we want to do is we want to kind of pull these apart and pull this from a vector out and kind of individualize this. So this is going to now tie in to the Z axis, which is what we want to access. Now I'm going to go ahead, Shift A S, put in a frame, because I like doing this step by step. Just kind of anywhere in the mesh area here, we could drop something in. I'll drop in a torus. I'm going to scale it down, Control A, and apply that scale, and then reselect my plane so this pops back up. And if you want, you could rename this, and we could just put prox cube, something like that. It doesn't matter, just so I can identify it. So if I grab this and have multiple objects and I don't know what to grab up here in the outliner, I could just grab the proximity cube and pull my geonodes back up. So it'd be kind of a pain. So now I'm going to grab all of this, kind of move it over a touch, and I'm going to want to now start building a proximity network. So Shift A S and frame. This object, I'll actually Shift D that, G and Y, kind of bring this over, maybe up a little. You just scale that one down, apply that scale. And so what I want to do is I want to drag some of these in. So I'm going to drag the torus in and start to build this. Come back over to my transform. Open that up. Let me bring that down a touch more and bring my proximity objects back up a little bit. All right, for now, now for a little bit of a more tricky part, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to switch these objects from original to relative, and that way they will at least begin to react with the geometry as proximity. Now the real trick is going to be getting in here with the map range and kind of figuring out how you want this. The video, and here are the settings that work really well for me. The from minimum to 0, the from maximum to 1, the to minimum to 0.02, and then the to max at negative 0.8. And what that kind of does is allows me to have a nice kind of a grab, if you will, on that mesh. And now it's got a nice proximity reaction going on, which is what we want. And now that we've got that, we could come over here and we could actually do some modifications. So let's go ahead and let's kind of bring this out a little bit. And what I'm thinking is we can cut that off and we will bring a join geometry here and join these two since they are technically the exact same mesh. And that will cause both of those torus objects to actually react at the same time. And if I can find my little tiny torus there. Yep, okay, so that's good. So now I've actually got a reaction with this one and a reaction with the other one. And now what we can do is drop in a couple more objects. Doesn't matter what. I'm going to drop in a cylinder. Just so it looks good. I'll shade that smooth, auto smooth. I'll scale this down a good bit and apply that scale. And I'll move this one over here. And then I want to put in a UV sphere. And I can shade that smooth, scale it down, apply the scale that one as well. Make sure to grab these and bring them up, something like that. And now what I want to do is I want to bring in the sphere, and I'm going to bring in the cylinder. And I can bring these out if I want. Bring the input down, plug these in, and then Alt and then right mouse will allow me to join the geometry if I want, but I don't want to do that. I want to bring another join geometry. So Alt right mouse, Alt right mouse, Alt right mouse. Connect all those, make these relative so they actually work. And then this is just called switch, and that's going to get confusing. So what we can do is we can put in, we'll call it something like object switch, keep it nice and basic. So as you switch between, and that's actually the Musgrave texture, which we need to work on. All right, and I renamed the wrong one. All right, so there we go. So for prototyping purposes, you'll have an object switch, and it perfectly reacts with each one of those individual sets. And I'm sure there's other ways to do this, but this will kind of get you started. Now for that Musgrave texture, I'm going to switch that here, and I'll actually rename that switch as well. Just call it texture switch, seems good. And let's bring the detail down on that quite a bit. Save that. Nice little Control S save if you have not done so yet. And I'm going to bring these up just a little bit. If you want to focus on something, just grab that object and hit F. It'll focus it. G and Z, kind of bring it up just a touch. Something like that. All right, that seems good. So that's pretty good. So far what we've done is we've put a grid in and we've offered a subdivide option for the grid. We have a grid size pulled in, which is procedural, a number of switches. We made some math here to kind of accommodate for the Z position. So we turned the switch here between textures into an option for a procedural landscape look, which is basically a displacement, which is the whole idea of what we're going for here. And then we also now have multiple objects, which you can just tie in as many as you want and kind of stack that idea if you wish. And kind of a fun little glitch here. If you drop in like a UV sphere and Alt right mouse to connect that, I don't actually have that showing up. It's kind of attached to the proximity, and so maybe that could be somewhat useful if you guys want to have some fun with that. You kind of put some spikes into your terrain, and just for the fun of it, I'm probably just going to leave that in there for now. And you can always hit M to mute something if you don't want, or Control X, and then Control Z. Usually won't crash you in geometry nodes as long as you're not doing anything too crazy. Now, real quick, the vertice count, I'm leaving that at 100. So if you have that too low, it's not really going to do much for you. So I'm leaving this at 100. And then the subdivision levels will help. But I wouldn't go over 2. Probably 1 would be good enough. And you can go to 0. Because at the end of this, what we can do is we can actually put in a subdivision surface, and then we can output the actual levels here. So Shift A S, type in group, and get a group input, and let's dump that right there and just pull the levels out. So that way we can come down here. Let's grab this. That'll be the sub D level. And that would be good to put right next to our actual subdivision level. And what we can do is let's call this sub level, and that'll be sub D level. So subdivision and sub D, two different things completely. And both will crash the PC if you try to do too many of them. So if you don't want to mix the two, you can see that you're adding subdivisions, but you're adding more geometry. And then for the subdivision surface, you're actually, and so real quick, the Subdivide Mesh node, just to say it a little bit better, you're going to basically add more geometry. And then the Subdivision Surface node, you're actually subdividing the surface with a bunch of options. You have different levels. You can maintain UVs on the islands. You can maintain how they're smooth on the edges, the junctions, boundaries. It has weighted edges if you put on an edge crease, and some other functions like the vertex crease, which is actually pretty cool. So it controls how much the subdivision surface should be pulled towards the vertex, similar to the edge creases, but allows individual vertices to be creased. And if you don't know what any of that means, it's just a way of protecting your UVs and using a slightly different setup. And the subdivision surface actually looks a little bit different than that now, because now we actually have these field outputs and so on. So you could come up here and kind of change all of these different options if you wish. But just be warned, both of these options 100% will crash the PC, and mixing those two is a little bit dangerous, but you can take your risks. All right, so on to the next task. Now we're going to do something pretty cool that is going to require us to join some geometry. So let's put in a join geo right here. We can put in a new frame. We could change the colors as we go. Change this one to like yellow. As long as they're just a little bit different, it's really going to help you out later to have all these different colors and understand. You can just hit F2 right there and call that objects, and then you'll have this nice little tag right there. It says objects, so that's helpful. And so what we want to do now, I'm going to come over here. Let's grab some transforms, Shift A, S, and we'll get some transform geometry. Go ahead and join that into there. Let's put a couple more in. And we'll do 4 of them. I think 4 will be sufficient. And what I want to do is I want to grab this geo, and I know this isn't a very good way to do it, but I'll fix you up in just a second. So we'll go ahead and tag this one into the first one, Shift right mouse right here, hit G to bring this down, and now we can start bringing all these different points in. And I think you can Alt lazy click that too if you want. Make sure to save. And Shift A, S. I want to not put a noise, I want to join the geometry here. And Alt right mouse just makes this so smooth and so much nicer. All right, so now all of that is joined up. What we're going to do with that is we're taking the base geometry that was actually a cube, and we're now going to tie that in and create kind of like instances with it. And all we have to do in order to do that is let's drag out the join geo, and if it makes more sense to you, just for now, you can bring this join down here and just Alt right mouse that, and you'll see your cube pop up. Now you've got your cube there. What you actually want to do is come down here, and you can left click drag and bring the scale down, and then we can bring this up on the Z axis for the transform. So put this to like 2, and we now have a cube here. And then we can probably offset that by like 0.5. And then I can come down here to the next one and make it like something like 0.2, make it a little bit smaller. I'll put this at 1 on the X, and then probably 4 on the Z. And now you can see how that's popped out. And I'll get rid of that camera, don't really want that. And you can bring it down a little bit if you want, put it anywhere you wish. And then we'll kind of just rinse and repeat. 0.3 here, bring this one over on the X by 1, and then bring this one up like 2. And now you've got another cube here. And now for the final one, you can do is 0.2 on the scale. We'll bring this one over -2 on the X, and bring this one up like 1.5 on the Z axis, and there we go. There's the final one out of the 4 that we have. And if you want to, you can actually take a moment and you can grab this transform node. So it's the active node, go to node, and you can come over here and you could put in something like top and call that the top one, and then try to figure out which one it is. It's going to be the bigger one right here, so we'll make that one go up top, and then we'll see which one this one is. It's going to be the little small one here. So let's go ahead and bring it out just a touch, something like that. And I've got a lot of lag, so I'm going to turn my subdivision and my other levels completely off, and that should actually make it go perfectly smooth. You just want to save that for like a final render. Okay, so this would be the 3rd cube down, unless I bring it up. Let's call this one cube 2 middle, and that kind of makes some kind of sense. And then I can come over here and I'll see which one this is. It's this one here, so I'm just going to call this one cube 3 lower. And then of course this one is going to probably move this one, and it does. And I'll rename this node to cube 4 bottom, and that'll save you a ton of headaches, while you're trying to actually go back through all that. All right, so let's build something else. I'm going to kind of move this back up for now, and Shift A S, let's type in convex for convex hole, which is technically like a proxy. and Shift S, and we'll type in dual, and we'll put in dual mesh. And just keep in mind what we're doing here is we're going to actually wrap the entire geometry by using the original geometry again before it was translated and make kind of a net around everything. Now we can put in a triangulate. Let's connect that. And now we can put in a mesh to curve, a curve to mesh. And this is all very common stuff that we're doing here. Very easy. Hopefully you can keep up. I'm actually going at a pretty slow pace. And now we want to put in a curved circle. And the curved circle is going to be the profile for this so that it represents what we're trying to do. All right, so we can actually drag the join geometry into the convex hull. But before we get over here, let's bring this to 0.005. And then you can lazy click this way. You don't have to point. You can just hit Control and select the join geometry. And now what we end up with is this kind of like net around each one of our instances. And that is the bounding box. And what we did is we created a wireframe here. So I want to take all of this and dump this into a frame and immediately give that a different color and grab the edge, hit F2, and then I just want to call this wireframe. Okay, and so from here, you could probably just go ahead and put in a Subdivide Mesh right here, and you could kind of increase the levels of that so it looks nice. And from here also, if you wanted to, you could put in a transform geometry for that and then kind of scale it up or down, whatever ends up making sense. You can have it kind of going out a little bit. I think it looks kind of good if we just do it about like that. Now it'll stay that way. And you know, you could move everything, you could rotate it, but really it's just for that one purpose. That's all that is. And now if we come back over here to these transforms, Shift A S, and let's put in a group input here. I don't advise you put all of these over here because it's going to get kind of convoluted, but you can now bring this over, and I didn't mean to grab scale. I wanted the transform. And now my scale is going to have to be reset 0.02, something like that. There we go. Looks a little better now. And so now as you move this around on the Z, it'll go up and down. And that cube, I'm at 0.2. I didn't mean 0.02. Now that cube, you can see how it will actually kind of like manipulate the mesh. And this is the one for the top, so we try to keep them in order if possible. Now we can actually have a little bit of fun also with the convex hull. And let's put in a distribute points on faces right here. And we want to supply the distribute point mesh with the convex hull. And we'll go ahead and put an instance on points right here. And we can tag that in. And then for the instances, I'm actually going to kind of come down here and make a new frame. And we can hit Shift A S, type in geometry, and get geometry to instances. And we'll put that inside of here. And the geometry to instances node, I just did a tutorial on that if you want to check it out. It's really cool. There's insane amount of potential for this thing. And you can kind of do the same thing here with that as the transform as you're doing with the instances there and here, basically. Hope that wasn't confusing. All right, so Shift A S, you can just put in an icosphere and kind of drag this over here. And before I actually tag that in, I want to check out my subdivision levels, because what I'm going to do with this is I'm now going to instance on the actual subdivided convex hull, okay? And then I'm instancing the geometry to instance, which allows you to put in, it's like a join geometry, So you can see this join geometry, they both have the same type of setup, but they're definitely not the same. This one's designed to join instances together. So what I could do is I could literally just Shift D this and tag these in. And I didn't change anything because it's not hooked up yet, so it doesn't matter. But I can go ahead and change this to 0.02, 0.05. I could put in a cube if I wanted to, and then I can join that up as well. And then I can bring this down considerably, something like 0.25, probably try 0.1 for that. And now we'll go ahead and connect the instance on points. And we could actually throw another join in, or we could just kind of bring all this down, whatever makes sense. And now go ahead and tag that into the join. And everything's a little too big. Kind of figured it might end up being that way. Oh, I changed the subdivisions to 0. So 0.05. 0.05, I literally did that on all of those, except for the cube. And I'll put 0.05 on that. And now, unfortunately, each one of these are in the same exact spot. So what we would want to do is transform the geometry here and potentially bring these up just a little bit, and maybe even bring the scale down on these. And I'll close that off. And I'll use another transform here, and I can kind of bring the cubes down just a touch, maybe right about there. Seems pretty good. And then I can just do the same thing here and just kind of offset where these actually end up. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drag the instance on points down a little bit to give myself some room. I'll bring the radius of this to 0.02, and I'll lazy connect that. So now that is going to be distributed. You can change the density level as you see fit. And also for something like this, feel free to put a set shade smooth on that. And then you could bring the subdivision level up to 2, so it doesn't look too bad. And maybe 0.01, just to kind of bring that down a little bit more. And let's go ahead and clean a couple things up. I'll grab this group input, hit H to hide, and kind of tuck that away right there. And if you wanted, you don't need to get back into any of these. You can hit H to hide and maybe grab all of these and hit S to scale them. It'll let me do it. And kind of bring that down a little bit smaller. Now I want the geometry translations here, the cubes, to actually interact with the proximity. And it's super easy. All I have to do is come outside of the convex hull and attach that, or I can come right out of the curve to mesh and tie that in. Okay, let me do it this way because it's getting kind of confusing. Just move this over here, make it a little bit easier, and then you can actually see it. So I've got a join geometry here for the proximity, and then I've got the curve to mesh output. So if I just tag that in directly, everything is now going to interact with the proximity and be super cool. And so now if I take that top cube and go to move it down, it's going to actually create like the neat little splash effect. And don't forget, all of the reactions that we're actually getting are going to be based on what we just hit over here, which is the map range. Actually, to hit H to unhide that. And so however you want this to end up looking, it's going to be indicative of what you do here. If you want this to kind of come up a little bit more, perhaps be a little thicker, so you can create like a gooey fall off or something like that. and it kind of envelops each one of these items as they come down, which is really cool. So it'd be a nice effect. And that mixed with the texture, you can switch between the two. And we still have the invisible sphere, so don't forget about that. That makes a pretty neat little thing. So you can change, of course, all of these instances. You can turn the shade smooth off, basically, if you're having trouble in the viewport. So don't forget, you can turn on your sub level 1. You can turn that completely off and give it nice 2 levels of subdivision with the shade smooth, and that will work out really, really nice. And then anything else you want to pull out of here, any other type of values, maybe you wanted the radius to be pulled out, you can pull out that radius. And now you can control those funky little spikes that are out there. And maybe that just makes some sense to you, and you can do that. All right, this tutorial went pretty long, but don't forget, you can come over and get the one I spent a lot of time making. This one's exceptionally precise, so you could come in here and any of these objects, of course, you'll switch your proxy collection and you can make them actually work with the proximity at pretty much any level that you wish. So it can kind of be kind of spooky. So for the translations here, just gonna play with this for a second. It's too much fun, too much fun. I think I've got a, yeah, so yeah, it's pretty good. Kind of a neat little splash grabbing effect. So you can animate these things as well and then change the subdivision levels. I've got a sub D on this as well. And just remember, guys, we are absolutely all learning. It takes a lot of time, no matter whether you're following a tutorial, someone else's tutorial and then creating something or not. It does not matter. It's going to take a lot of time to understand all this. All the set materials are here. And so like if you wanted to do some set material setups over here, very easy. So in front of a thing like the convex hull, Shift A S, set material, okay, and you can drop that in. And I got more on the Gumroad, obviously, because you'll be getting the full setup all ready to go. And you can switch that to the green material here, and then you'll be able to see how that actually translates out. Not everything's going to end up exactly the way you think or where you think it should be. So take your time and kind of beta test and figure out what is or isn't going to turn a certain color. And so if I come over here, maybe make this one red, and then you can see you can individually change these and start putting the same material or different materials on there as you see fit, and just kind of creating some kind of neat little collage thing like I did. And then you can switch each one of these, and then of course each one of these materials can actually be pulled out of here. So you just take this red wire and plug it in here, and then you will have an output in your geometry nodes for that. Don't forget to rename it. And that's it, guys. I'll see you on the next tutorial lesson.